She checked into New York's most exclusive hotels with cards that didn't work. She convinced a private jet company to fly her across the country for a billionaires conference. She got close enough to a $22 million bank loan that a real financial institution started real due diligence on a club that didn't exist. And her actual bank balance, the whole time, close to nothing. This isn't a made-up case. This isn't a story pieced together from rumors. This is Anna Sorokin, the woman the world came to know as Anna Delvey. By the end of this video, a jury will convict her on 8 felony counts. She'll go to prison. The day she's released, immigration agents will be waiting for her. And a few years after that, somehow, she'll end up dancing on national television with a court-ordered ankle monitor on her leg. This is how a woman with almost no money convinced New York's wealthiest people that she was one of them. Let's start at the beginning, because the beginning tells you everything about how this worked. Anna Sorokin was born in 1991 in a small town outside Moscow. When she was a teenager, her family moved to Germany. Nothing unusual yet. Just a regular girl in a regular family. Then she moved to Paris. And that's where something changed. She started going by a new name, Anna Delvey. It was a twist on her mother's maiden name, but it sounded different. It sounded European. It sounded old money. By the time she landed in New York, sometime around 2013 or 2014, she wasn't Anna Sorokin anymore. She was Anna Delvey, a German heiress with a trust fund reportedly worth somewhere between $60 and $67 million, supposedly tied to her father's solar panel business back in Europe. Here's the thing, none of that was true. Her actual father, when a journalist eventually tracked him down, said flatly that he'd never heard of any trust fund in his life. But at the time, nobody was checking. And that's the whole point. Anna didn't try to con random people on the street. She went straight for New York's inner circles, art world openings, exclusive social clubs like Soho House, Fashion Week parties. Rooms where everyone around her already looked wealthy, dressed well, spoke confidently. Rooms where nobody thinks to ask, "Wait, can I actually see your bank statement?" Because in those rooms, appearing rich isn't just enough to get you in the door. It's the actual currency. And Anna understood that instinctively. She tipped generously. She dressed the part. She dropped just enough detail about her supposed inheritance to sound plausible, without giving anyone anything concrete enough to verify. And it worked. She started getting invited places. She started making the kind of friends who introduce you to other rich people. Slowly, the persona built its own momentum. The more people who believed she was an heiress, the more other people assumed she must be. Because why would all these people be wrong? That's not hacking a system. That's something more human, and honestly more unsettling. She exploited the fact that in high society, trust doesn't come from proof. It comes from who's already vouching for you. So how does someone with basically no real money actually live like a millionaire in one of the most expensive cities on earth? The answer is almost embarrassingly simple once you see the pattern. She never needed to prove she had money. She just needed everyone to assume somebody else already had. Take the private jet story. Anna wanted to attend Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway shareholder conference out in Omaha. So she reached out to a jet charter company called Blade, the kind of app wealthy New Yorkers used to book private flights on demand. She told Blade staff she was friends with the company's CEO, someone she claimed to have met at Soho House. Then, to actually pay for the flight, she sent over what looked like a wire transfer confirmation from Deutsche Bank for the full cost, somewhere around $35,000. The confirmation was forged. But it looked real enough, and she'd already built enough social credibility that the company let her board. Then there was the hotel living. Anna spent long stretches at some of New York's most upscale hotels, including 11 Howard and the Beekman. She'd rack up massive bills, and rather than paying them off immediately, she'd let them stretch out, sometimes leaving before the full amount was settled, always with some story about wire transfers being delayed, or a trust manager being unreachable, or paperwork getting stuck. And it wasn't just hotels and jet companies. She borrowed directly from people who trusted her. An art collector she'd befriended lent her a few $1,000s for a trip to a prestigious art event overseas. He didn't get repaid until he pushed hard enough that it became uncomfortable not to. A British designer who did branding work for her was never paid the roughly £16,800 he was owed. But the boldest move of all was the loan. Anna had a real business plan, at least on paper. She wanted to open a private members club in New York called the Anna Delvey Foundation, blending art gallery, restaurant, and social club into one exclusive space. To fund it, she went after serious institutional money, pursuing financing from a real bank and a real investment firm, seeking a loan north of $20 million. She actually got far enough into that process that real due diligence began. Bankers were looking at her paperwork. That's how convincing the persona had become, not just convincing enough to get a free hotel room, but convincing enough that financial professionals started treating her like a legitimate client. That deal eventually fell apart before any money changed hands. But think about what that tells you. The genius here was never technical. She didn't hack any systems or forge complicated documents that would fool an expert. What she did was far simpler and, honestly, far scarier. She got each person in the chain to assume that somebody earlier in the chain had already done the verifying. The hotel assumed the bank had checked her out. The bank assumed her social circle had vetted her. Her social circle assumed the hotels and the parties she attended meant she must be legitimate. Round and round it went, and nobody was the one actually checking. Every one of these stories, up to this point, is almost fun to hear. A woman outsmarting hotels and private jet companies. But this next part is where the story stops being fun, because this is where a real person got seriously hurt. In May of 2017, Anna invited a group of friends on what she called an all-expenses-paid trip to Marrakesh, Morocco. They stayed at La Mamounia, a 5-star resort, in a private riad that cost around $7,000 a night. One of the friends on that trip was Rachel Deloach Williams, who at the time worked as a photo editor at Vanity Fair. When it came time to settle the bill, Anna's cards, predictably, didn't work. And this time, instead of just letting the bill sit unpaid the way she had with hotels before, she turned to Williams. She convinced Williams to put the bill on her own corporate American Express card, a bill that came out to around $62,000, promising that a wire transfer to pay her back was already on its way. That wire transfer never fully arrived. Williams was left personally on the hook for tens of thousands of dollars, only partially reimbursed, and dealing with the fallout on her own corporate card, tied to her actual job. This is the moment the whole story flips. Up until Morocco, Anna's victims were largely institutions, hotels, banks, jet companies, places that can usually absorb a loss. But Williams was a working journalist, not a faceless corporation. And she was the one who eventually went public. Williams wrote a personal essay about what happened, and around the same time, journalist Jessica Pressler published an in-depth investigation in New York Magazine, laying out the full scope of Anna's scheme. Together, those two pieces are what turned this from a handful of angry hotel managers and quiet lawsuits into a story the entire country was suddenly talking about. By October of 2017, the net was closing in. Anna was arrested in Los Angeles by police, in a sting operation coordinated with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Williams, the same friend she'd left holding a $62,000 bill, was directly involved in helping set that operation up. Anna was extradited back to New York and held on Rikers Island without bail. Within a few weeks, she was formally indicted, facing charges connected to roughly $275,000 taken through a string of different schemes across multiple institutions and individuals. The trial happened in the spring of 2019, in a Manhattan courtroom that, fittingly, drew the same kind of media circus that had surrounded her rise. On April 25, 2019, the jury delivered its verdict, guilty on 8 separate counts, including multiple counts of grand larceny and theft of services. Interestingly, she was acquitted on the most serious charge, the one tied to that attempted $22 million bank loan for her members' club. The jury apparently wasn't convinced that particular scheme had gone far enough to count as completed fraud, even though the intent was clearly there. She was sentenced to 4 to 12 years in state prison. Most scam stories end here. Sentencing, prison, the end. This one doesn't. And honestly, this next part might be the strangest chapter of the whole thing. Anna was released on parole in February of 2021, after serving roughly 2 years. But her freedom didn't last long. About 6 weeks after walking out of prison, she was picked up by immigration authorities for overstaying her visa. She spent well over a year in immigration detention before finally being moved to home confinement in October of 2022, an ankle monitor, a strict travel radius of about 70 miles, and life inside her East Village apartment. And while all of that was happening in real courtrooms and detention centers, something else entirely was happening in pop culture. In February of 2022, Netflix released Inventing Anna, a dramatized series based on her story, starring Julia Garner. It became a massive hit. By the end of that year, Anna herself had sold roughly $340,000 worth of her own artwork, paintings and drawings she'd started making, in part, about her own case. Then, in 2024, in maybe the most surreal twist of all, Anna Sorokin was cast on Dancing with the Stars. She competed on live network television, ankle monitor visible in her promotional photos, as part of the terms of her ongoing house arrest. She was eliminated in the first round of cuts, but the fact that she was there at all says everything about where her story had ended up. She said publicly that she's trying to stay busy and productive, though she's noted that house arrest limits how much she can actually do or create. Her deportation case is still working its way through the courts, and by most accounts, she still hasn't repaid the majority of what she took. So here's the thing that makes this story different from most financial scams we cover on this channel. Anna Sorokin never hacked a system. She never forged some brilliant, technically complex scheme that fooled experts. What she did was something much simpler and much more human. She figured out that in rooms full of wealthy, image-conscious people, nobody wants to be the one who asks an awkward question about money. Everyone assumes someone else already checked. Hotels assumed the banks had checked her out. Banks assumed her social circle had already vetted her. Her friends assumed that if she was staying at these hotels and attending these events, she had to be legitimate. Nobody wanted to be the one who broke the illusion. So the illusion held, for years, until one person she'd personally hurt decided the cost of staying quiet was higher than the cost of speaking up. And even now, being caught hasn't really closed the door on her. It just moved her into a new room. Same spotlight. Different cameras. If this story caught you off guard, let me know in the comments. Would you have caught on to Anna Delvey, or do you think you'd have been fooled too? If you enjoyed this story, like, share and subscribe for more. There are more exciting business and money stories waiting to be told. I'll see you in the next one.